How's it going guys, Kris here, and the topic for today's video is pistols, as we're going to be taking a look at a few of my best ones over the different Battlefield titles. Secondary weapons can be just as useful as those primaries in the right situation, handy for finishing weakened players off, getting you out of trouble when your main gun runs dry, or even as an alternative choice to that main gun that might just so happen to be better suited for close quarter encounters instead. The automatic pistols come in a pretty wide variety of forms in Battlefield, but typically function in a slightly less risky choice of the revolvers, with the pistols generally being more adaptable and simple to use in comparison. But out of all of the games, there's still a hell of a lot to pick from, all doing their own things better or worse than each other in slightly different ways. This list is just going to play out in a similar way to the last ones, running over the guns I'd consider to be some of the best, or at least some of the ones that have stood out the most to me, over the different Battlefield games. It's just for a bit of fun, so don't get too offended if your favourite doesn't get featured in the video, but do let me know which pistols you prefer using down below in the comments, and why you like to do so. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with it. So we're kicking the list off with the MP443, a Russian semi-automatic pistol that's appeared in quite a few of the different Battlefield games set in present day. Basically putting it, this gun just feels like a really nicely balanced weapon. It doesn't exactly provide you with any sort of massive advantage, but at the same time doesn't have any glaring weaknesses either that could cause any issues. I guess it sort of developed a bit more character in Battlefield 4 coming from Battlefield 3, where it was essentially just the same as the M9, with a slightly lower bullet speed but slightly larger magazine. In Battlefield 4, the MP443 was a pistol that sat right in the middle of the pack regarding its fire rate and damage profile, not being one of the slowest or fastest shooting guns, but also not one of the weakest or strongest either, helping to make it more well-rounded. It had a fairly high amount of upwards kick per shot, but at the same time, barely any horizontal drift, often making the gun feel more accurate than others as a result. The MP443 had the biggest mag size of all the 9mm pistols, and with all those other factors combined, made it a very versatile and easy to use firearm. Not exactly the most interesting pistol in this list, but still one that deserves credit for being an overall great, reliable option to pick. At number 9 is Battlefield 1's From the Stop, more often than not, the sniper's best friend. This teeny little thing is a lot more powerful and useful than it might seem, as although it may have fired one of the weakest bullets of all the pistols, it more than made up for it by having that 450 RPM fire rate, which, if you could tap the trigger fast enough, was even on par with some of the fully automatic weapons. Of course, it wasn't the only handgun to fire this fast, as apart from a few minor stat tweaks here and there, the From a Stop pistol was almost identical to 3 other secondary weapons that featured in each of the main classes. The main thing that made the From a Stop so special was the fact that it was often much more productive than the other 3, working really well to complement a sniper loadout, being able to finish players off really quickly and effectively after a well-placed rifle shot. It had a distinct advantage over the other 3 pistols by having the fastest sidearm deploy speed in the game, letting you swap from your main gun to the From a Stop in less than half a second. And combine that with the gun's rapid fire rate meant that you could always rely on it as a handy backup, complementing your rifle by just getting a bit more damage onto your target to take them out of the fight, making it the perfect tool for finishing people off with. Next up, we're heading over to Battlefield 5, where you'll be able to find the Walther PPK. But it isn't the standard version that's worth using over most of the other sidearms. It's actually the suppressed variant, which is quite literally just a straight up statistical upgrade. The normal unsuppressed PPK is still a pretty decent pistol in its own right, actually functioning a little bit like some of the fast firing pistols from Battlefield 1, like the From a Stop that we've just gone over. Battlefield 5's PPK had the same fire rate and similar damage model to those guns, and it basically acted as a good finishing off tool with a manageable recoil pattern and fairly snappy reloads, compared to its counterparts in the same game. Deploy speed wasn't exactly the best, being a teeny bit slower to whip out compared to a few of the other guns like the Ruby pistol, but nevertheless the PPK was still a good sidearm at the end of the day. But that suppressed variant was an even better sidearm, because you not only had that suppressor attached, which dampened the sound of it firing and hid directional damage indicators, allowing you to be a little bit more stealthy, but it actually had almost 30% less upwards recoil than the standard PPK, improving on it, thus making it an even better choice without any big trade-off. In 7th place is the Beretta 93R, a rapid-firing 3-round burst machine pistol that's appeared in quite a lot of different Battlefield games. We first saw it in Bad Company 2, and it hasn't exactly changed a hell of a lot over the years, pretty much being the same 900 RPM weapon that it was originally, with a few small tweaks here and there to its damage model and recoil stats over the different titles it's popped up in. With the best iteration of the gun probably being in Battlefield 3, due to it having slightly more generous recoil stats, along with that larger mag size of 20 shots. Whichever game you equip the 9.3R in though, you could always expect it to play out in a fairly similar way. Potentially being brutal in close quarter combat due to its quick 3-round bursts, but an often less useful weapon for taking on players further away because of its heavy vertical kick readings and high amount of spread build-up. Unless you were nearby to your target, spamming the trigger was often a bit of a waste of time, because it caused the pistol to fly around all over the place, forcing you to shoot slower and recover your aim after each burst. This took a bit of getting used to, but the speed advantage you gained from the gun was almost unrivaled, especially against players within shorter distances where the 9.3R could even function better than a lot of primary weapons, with its rapid kill times and swift reload speeds. The next gun in the list is a fairly interesting pistol from Battlefield Hardline, one that's got its own fixed attachments that can be used by all classes and factions, the G17 Race Pistol. The standard G17 pistol appears in a few of the games, but the Race Pistol variant only featured in Hardline as a DLC weapon. It's got its own compensator and coyote sight attached at all times, and that's all the gun can have attached, but to be honest, that's all the gun really needs, because it's definitely one of the strongest sidearms on offer in the game, having a lot of precision, high recoil recovery rate, lots of bullets per magazine, nippy reload speeds, and some really solid kill times up close and at range. So basically it does pretty much everything that you'd want a secondary weapon to do. That coyote sight is exclusive to the G17 Race Pistol, and it's easily one of the clearest and easiest to use sights in the entire game, just like it was in Battlefield 4. And this helps to complement the gun's accuracy and make it even more fun to use. With it being such a great, well-rounded handgun that can be used on practically any loadout, makes it one of my favourites in the whole series. Not to mention that it does look pretty cool too. So if we're going off looks, this gun's also got that up its sleeve as well. And number 5 is probably one of the best rounded sidearms in Battlefield 1, the MLE 1903, a gun that isn't tied to any specific class, that's generally got a really nice balance of stats across the board. Now this pistol kinda reminds me a little bit of Battlefield 4's MP443. It's sort of in the middle regarding its fire rate, being quicker than quite a few of the other sidearms like the P08 and C96, but it's also slower than those faster firing pocket pistols. The MLE 1903 is also sort of in the middle regarding its damage model too, being relatively strong up close, but not exactly having the best range of the bunch. This might make the gun sound fairly average, being a bit of a middle ground weapon, but it's also got one of the most controllable recoil patterns to go along with it, kicking upwards less than most of the others, whilst also drifting around less from side to side too, allowing you to keep the bullets flying at a decent rate without too many of them straying off target. Not to mention the fact that the MLE 1903 also just so happens to have a faster deploy speed than average as well, making it an even better weapon for whipping out and finishing people off with, which can often be crucial in the middle of a gunfight where you just need to rely on some extra firepower to get the job done. The MLE 1903 might be hampered by its reload speed, being a bit on the slower side, but this still shouldn't really cause you too many problems, with it just being an effective tool to rely on for a bit of backup whenever you need it most. Coming in at 4th place is definitely one of the most powerful semi-automatic handguns you'll be able to find in the Battlefield games, the Desert Eagle, aka the DEAGLE. If you want to punch some big holes into your enemies, then this is a pretty good weapon to run with. The DEAGLE made its appearance in Battlefield 4 and sort of functioned like a bit of a middle weapon between the pistols and the revolvers, perhaps having slightly more in common with the latter. Because of this, it shared a lot of traits from both sides, and sort of blended them up together, having the same power and heavy recoil as the likes of the revolvers, but having snappier and more consistent reload speeds and bigger magazines, to make the gun more reliable, countering one of the revolver's most notable weaknesses. But having all that power meant that the gun had to take a bit of a hit elsewhere, and although it fired faster than most of the revolvers, it was still pretty far behind the other semi-automatic handguns, putting more pressure on you to land your shots, which wasn't always easy, due to the DEAGLE's strong kick and bouncy nature. With that said, it combined some of the best and worst parts of both sidearm types, to make a gun that was still very effective and fun to use in the end, retaining lots of power over range to make it one of the deadliest sidearms in the series. Next gun in the list is the fully automatic G18 machine pistol, a sidearm that could dominate other players in close quarters but was generally far less dependable over range. This gun pretty much put all of its eggs in the same basket, being a ridiculously deadly thing to use against enemies nearby, due to it having one of the fastest fire rates in all the games it's featured in. Where the 9.3R pistol fired 3 shots per trigger pull, this was essentially like having a fully automatic version, sharing the same damage model, but not being limited to burst fire. This let you discharge all of the gun's ammo in much longer streams, helping to ensure that a nearby target is gonna hit the floor. The G18 was a wild and often uncontrollable beast, but it was a complete and utter savage within those closer distances. Not only compared to other sidearms, but even giving a lot of the game's primary weapons a run for their money too. It's definitely not the most reliable or versatile pistol in the list, having limited range and often running out of ammo very quickly in between enemy encounters. But whenever you needed a bit of extra close range power, whether that be to quickly finish someone off or even act as an alternative to your main gun that might not be well suited to close quarter battles, then the G18 was always a really strong choice that could often make up for its limitations by just being so bloody effective up close. A pistol that is a hell of a lot more versatile is Battlefield 5's P38, which, just like a few of the other sidearms in this list, has one of the best balance of stats in the game it's featured in. This is yet another one of those simple but productive middle-of-the-pack kind of weapons that sits between the other slower and faster firing options, actually dealing a little bit more damage over range than a few of the quicker ones, giving it a bit more potential against players further away. In the same fashion as Battlefield 1's Emily 1903, the P38 pistol's got a quicker than average deploy speed, meaning you can switch over to it in less time, always a really handy stat to have. Plus it also has one of the most generous recoil patterns of all the secondary weapons too, with a fairly low amount of upwards kick, letting you spam the trigger without having to worry about the gun bouncing around too much, limiting its accuracy and effectiveness over range. Reloads aren't quite the snappiest, but still not too bad overall. And because the P38's got an above average magazine size of 9 bullets, this is often plenty to have in most situations, making it an overall great sidearm, ticking all the right boxes for being a solid, well-rounded choice for most players and most loadouts. So my number one best pistol probably has to be the good old trusty M1911, that's saved my ass over the years more times than I can count. It may be one of the most well-known sidearms in the Battlefield series, but that's because it's almost always been a good one to pick. The M1911 typically follows a similar trend in most of the games, being a slightly slower firing gun with a slightly higher damage output. It's capable of killing in less shots in close quarters as a result, which more often than not can be the difference between winning or losing a fight against someone nearby, as the extra power that those 45 ACP cartridges provide can cut kill times down, despite the gun firing at that slower than average pace. Some of the other stats vary from game to game, with the M1911 probably being at its strongest in Battlefield 1, having the fastest reload speeds of the whole lot, swapping mags over in just over a second, giving it some of the fastest reloads of any weapon in the entire series. The M1911 proved its worth in other games too, despite the fact that it had a bit more recoil than normal, compensating for that extra power per bullet. It's one of the only weapons to appear in pretty much every main Battlefield game, and although it was definitely better in certain games over others, there's no denying that it's one of the best pistols in the series, that's been fairly consistent and always very useful. So those are a few of my favourite pistols in the Battlefield games, but do let me know which ones you think are the best down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop us a like on your way out, and subscribe to the channel to see loads more content on Battlefield and other games on there too. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.